Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we are very fortunate to be joined by a guest who has already made a number of previous appearances on the Gaggle, which is a French political scientist and physicist, Jean Bricmont. Last time he promised that he would talk about quantum mechanics, but we decided not to do quantum mechanics today. However, we will talk about France because he's, of course, excellently placed to tell us what's going on in France. As we know, there have been riots now for several days. Yesterday, it seemed to quieten down a bit, but who knows whether that means that it's come to an end. And the first impression is that it all seems very similar to what happened in the United States 3 years ago in the aftermath of the George Floyd riots. It was triggered, in this case, by the shooting of a teenager, and then all hell broke loose. And now we're having essentially looting and lots of young men having a good time robbing and grabbing whatever they can. So, Jean, help us to make sense of what actually is going on in France.
Okay. Well, first, one precision doesn't matter very much, but I'm Belgian, not French. I live in France most of the time, but I mean, it doesn't, usually I don't care, and I don't care very much about nationalities, but the point is that I have a non-French view on French society, which may matter a little bit. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think the situation is absolutely tragic, and I will explain why. But of course, we can start with a little bit of Schadenfreude to see Macron, who was closely monitoring the situation in Russia during the failed Prigozhin, whatever it was, a coup, call it what you, but anyway, adventure, let's say adventure, right. Was a total failure. And now, of course, he's in deep trouble in the sense that there are all these uprisings everywhere in France. Of course, they will stop. I mean, everything always stops. I mean, the yellow vest stopped, the union protest against stopped, and now they're going to stop. Okay. But that doesn't mean that any deep problem is solved. Now, about the comparison with the United States, there is a big difference. Is that at least the blacks in the United States, the Latinos is different, but the blacks, and there were many blacks in this, in this protest, have always been there. I mean, many of them have ancestors who were there long before most of the white came, because the white came in the 19th, 20th century and so on. And in France, the people who are targeted, or at least who we will speak about, are descendants of immigrants. Most of them are French, because you are French, like in the US, if you are born there. That's the same rule as in the US. But these people, nevertheless, have this different mentality. I mean, the American blacks are patriotic. I mean, they don't agree with the whites, maybe, but the French descendants of immigrants, there is a whole problem of France of having had so many immigrants coming from their former empire. And it's a very easy excuse, or maybe it's not an excuse, but it's a very easy reason to, rebel against France. If you say, they go, it's like the Holocaust. I mean, another community is using the Holocaust to force us into policies that are not good for us, or censorship and so on. But you see, I want to say that there are basically two errors. One comes from the left and the liberal right. I mean, which has always said that immigration is not a problem. And the immigrants from the left, at least the old left, it doesn't exist anymore, but the old left would say, well, they will join the working class and they'll be in the class struggle and so on. And to a certain extent, when the Communist Party was strong, or even the Socialist Party in Belgium, that was true to some extent. But then, with the rise of Islamism, all the wars in the Middle East and the conflict and so on, I mean, this is no longer true. And then, of course, the right, the liberal right, that's the dominant, because the left is now the liberal right, okay? So the liberal right say, oh, never mind, they'll go to a shopping center, they will maximize their basket of goods, and that's all there is in life. And the right, the so-called far right, which I think there is not really far right, but it's just informed about human psychology, would say, no, people have identities, they like to be in groups and to identify with groups. And you have people on the same territory that have different group identification, that always leads to conflict. And the French don't realize that, but they just should go one country to the north, namely to Belgium, to see that. In Belgium, we have two communities who are separated only by language. I mean, used to be religion, but that doesn't matter anymore. It's language. But nevertheless, there are conflicts all the time. There has never been a civil war. There's never been a genocide, nothing like that. But there are conflicts all the time. The conflicts are usually ridiculous. They are not serious. They're not deep. They are not dangerous, but there are conflicts. And that's because they have different identifications. Some, identify as Flemish-speaking or Dutch-speaking, and the other as French-speaking. And it's unavoidable. But of course, that doesn't mean that you can't coexist. But in order to coexist, you must make effort to understand the other side. And that is something that now, of course, now the leftist discourse about everything is going to be fine and everything will integrate and so on. We don't need to do anything special for that. That has totally collapsed. And what has replaced now is what used to be the far right, or is actually the right. It's even the socialist parties like that. So it's everybody except, and even the so-called far left isn't saying the same thing as they used to, is that now we have to use brute force. And we are going to use brute force to quell the result. And of course, it will work for some time. But I've not been in this demonstration, obviously, but I've been in the Yellow Vest and in the Union. And I can assure you, although it wasn't terribly violent, but nevertheless, the French police is using violence against demonstrators in a totally unjustified way. I mean, they attack people who are totally peaceful. I've seen that in the Yellow. I'm not saying that the whole movement was. I mean, of course, the Yellow Vest also burned cars and destroyed things and so on. But nevertheless, that doesn't justify the police to attack you with, grenades and everything when you are totally peaceful. And they do that. And I don't believe that they're going to be suddenly Mr. Nice Guy when they go to the suburbs. That I don't believe. I've not been there myself, but. And I think that's, you see, there is no understanding. There is a denial on the left. There used to be a denial that there is a potential conflict. But on the right, now, they say, okay, let's do like Israel. I mean, Zemmour says that. Zemmour explicitly says we should follow the Israeli model. But is Israel such a success? Is that what we want?
So what does that mean? Could you just explain? What do you mean? Does the Israeli
you mean a form of apartheid?
He says explicitly that you have to handle the banlieue, I mean the suburbs, like Israel deals with Gaza.
Oh, like the settlements, yeah.
Not even the settlements or Gaza. I mean, are they going to bomb what are they going to do? I mean, you see, the problem I have is also this. I'm very secular. I'm totally non-religious, secular, everything you want. But nevertheless, there is a problem with French secularism that I understand why people are religious, and I'm willing to discuss with people who are religious. But there's a blockage that they can't talk to people who are religious or even listen to them. For example, there is a famous guy whom I don't like particularly, Tariq Ramadan. I don't like him because he was supporting the insurrection in Syria, but so was the French government. So that's not the reason why they don't like him. They don't like him because he's supporting the Palestinians. We always come back to this issue, which has nothing to do with France, but where the attitude with respect to Israel and Palestine determines a lot of attitude with respect to French politicians. And Mélenchon is attacked now, the same way Corbyn has been attacked in Britain. Anyway, so let's go back to Ramadan. Ramadan is actually moderate. He's moderate, but he's sufficiently Muslim, or he used to be at least. Now he has all these sex problems, but that's before that, to be able to be listened to by people in the suburbs. I mean, now, for example, the far right says that Mélenchon, he doesn't condemn the uprising and he's responsible for the chaos and so on. Mélenchon has no influence whatsoever. The left party and so on have no influence whatsoever in the suburbs, okay? And those youth don't hardly know who they are, who he is. So there's zero influence. But if you take people like Tariq Ramadan, there is also a mayor in a city in the banlieue, in the suburbs, who came to TV and he said, well, what do the youth tell me? They say that if nothing burns, you are not going to be invited on TV. When things burn, then you invite me. Why don't you invite me when nothing burns? We have solutions. At least he thinks he has solutions. But they're never going to. He's a very reasonable guy.
Well, you're talking about the solutions, but let's talk about what the problem is first here. I mean, you said something in the very beginning that I think is absolutely fascinating in talking about immigrants, first and second generation. There seems to be nobody in France attached to France anymore, okay? And I think this is part of the neoliberal ideology. I mean, why should they take France seriously if the people in power don't either? I mean, it seems to be a logical extension of it here.
And that's the thing that
talks these platitudes about, you know, a world's-based order, you know, European values and all. I mean, George and I, you know, and yourself, we're all from a European tradition, but when a politician talks like that, I have no idea what they're talking about.
That's right. And the other thing is that France always prided itself that, well, we insist on assimilation. So we're not really like the British or the Germans, that we just allow these communities to develop and so become separate entities within the nation state. No, we turn them into Frenchmen. So what happened to that idea that everyone's going to become a Frenchman, you know, in our schools?
Well, the reason I say it is not so simple. I mean, also there's a question of what you mean by assimilated. You see, I always ask, are people like Descartes, Voltaire, Diderot, Molière, Hugo, and Sartre French? They're not French, then who is? But all these people...
Sorry, they're what? You said they're not French.
They're not French. Who is French? Okay?
Yeah.
But if they are French, then you must notice that all of them had either to flee or be in conflict with the authorities of their country. The OAS, during the Algerian War, was saying, shoot Sartre. There was attempts against him, and there was attempts against Malraux's daughter, etc. So, I mean, history is not so simple. Victor Hugo had to flee to Belgium, among other places. But, I mean, it's not simple. I mean, this notion of being French, you can be French and very critical of French society. That's a merit of France, that you can. But now, the dominant discourse on the right is that you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be. If you're critical, for example, if you just say, like I am, justice for Naël, which obviously, I mean, the guy has been killed. I mean, whatever he did, I mean, the death penalty doesn't exist. And even if it existed, the police can't apply it. And you just say you need an inquiry. Then you are supposed to be pro. I mean, it's the same craziness that's with Putin, you know? If people say, but the same people who say we should maybe talk to Putin are then often, unfortunately, on the far right. And then, of course, those people don't want to talk to the suburbs. But we have to find a negotiation and a settlement with everybody, both in foreign policy and inside. And it's the same thing, you are Putin-Versteher, as they say in German, and then you are pro-Putin and so on, and you say, look, Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, why can't they be independent or autonomous or something like that? And Crimea has always been Russian, etc. If you say just that, which is the minimum you could say about the situation there, in which I say, then you are, I'm called names like pro-Putin or whatever. Okay, I don't vote in Russia, so I'm not either pro or against Putin. But the point is, here is the same thing, which we say justice for Naël, for this young guy who was shot dead. I mean, it's obvious that there has to be an inquiry. Now, I'm not saying that the policeman will be condemned, but that we have to see. I mean, there has to be a fair inquiry, and an inquiry has to not only be fair, that's a thing my father always told me, he was a lawyer, that justice does not have only to be fair, but to look fair. It has to have the appearance of fairness. And that's something which is often missed.
Right.
And I'm afraid
do you think that Macron bungled it by rushing out a statement saying, oh, he condemns what the police did? Did that cause a lot of the rioting because of Macron's intervention?
No, certainly not. He has no influence in the suburbs. People, I mean, there's a society which is fractional.
No, like you keep saying the suburbs. Can you explain to our viewers why you're making that distinction all of the time?
Oh, that's because in French, there is the translation of the word banlieue. And that's because for example, in Belgium, a lot of the migrant population lives inside Brussels, and the bourgeoisie and the petit bourgeoisie is in the suburbs. And in the States, it's the same system. But in France, in the opposite, the Paris, inside Paris, it's not entirely true. When I live in Paris, it's not exactly a bourgeois neighborhood, but nevertheless, the rents are very high, so people are moved in the suburbs, and in the suburbs you have the, you know, the poor whites and the migrants. And of course, yeah, the same problem. It's a different configuration than in the US or in countries like Belgium. I don't know about other countries, and that's why I call it the suburb. But of course, that's a, you know, it's a generalization which is maybe not very appropriate, but it's the way people speak.
Well, Jean, we can go back to the riots of 1968 all the way up to the present. What makes this different? Okay, because France has, we see it all the time. I can't remember what year it was. It was like maybe it was in 2008 during the economic crisis, and it was this mania to burn cars, just to burn cars all over the city. And I can remember because I think we were watching Eurovision or something like that. And I was with my Russian friends and they said, why would someone why would people be happy to see burning cars? I saved all my money to buy a car and people are really proud they have a car. And then you see this mania, let's burn cars. I mean, for the outside, for us in the jungle, if I could mention Burrell, for us in the jungle, it's very weird.
The remark about the jungle and the garden was quite inappropriate. In fact, there were Chinese tourists in Marseille who were coming from the jungle, supposedly visiting the garden, and their car was attacked by the rioters. And I think
there you go.
They got a very negative impression of the garden. But I mean, we can have a lot of schadenfreude about all the silly things that they say, but nevertheless, the situation is totally terrible because not only just cars, it's police stations, it's supermarkets, it's housing that are burning. I mean, it's really absolutely terrible. It's more violent than 2005, but I think it won't last necessarily as long. When I saw this thing started in Nanterre, I just finished reading a long book about de Gaulle and this reaction to 68. And I thought 68 was fun. I mean, it was negative in many ways, and it was unfortunate that de Gaulle had to resign. I mean, he didn't resign immediately, but a little later. And there was a lot of problem, but nevertheless, it was a fete. It was a party. Okay, it was not what is now. Now it's absolutely tragic. I mean, in '68 there were cars overturned and burned and so on, but the whole atmosphere was festive. Okay, and it was of course French people in the main and so on. And now there is a real, ethnic, national, I would say, conflict.
So is this?
That is something that is much harder to solve than just giving. I mean, well, it's interesting to see what happened in '68. I mean, Pompidou was prime minister and de Gaulle was president. De Gaulle was absolutely in favor of repression, and Pompidou didn't take the whole thing seriously at all. He says, "Give them lecture hall, and they will make the revolution. The lecture hall, and they will leave us in peace." That's what he said all the time. His attitude was always open the Sorbonne, let them do whatever they want. And in fact, it worked. I mean, because of most of these people in the end became neoliberal or neoconservative. So, I mean, the Pompidou was perfectly lucid about, but here it's not so simple. I mean, it's really not so simple.
So, I mean, we have to sort of address the elephant in the room. I mean, is this a result of the policy of bringing in millions of migrants? I mean, this has been a European policy. It goes back to the 1950s and 60s. And there were politicians, of course, famously Enoch Powell in the United Kingdom, who in the 1960s began warning, hey, we're going to have serious problems down the road. And that seems to be pretty much the case in many parts of Europe. I mean, it's serious problems. Is that what this is? I mean, just this a policy, essentially cheap labor. I mean, it was cheap labor that was driving this.
Yeah, I know. That's certainly, there was both, the employers wanted cheap labor, and there's a sort of moral left who, in the name of human rights, wanted always to encourage immigration. But it's not just Enoch Powell. I mean, I remind you that Georges Marchais, who was the leader of the Communist Party at that time, said that he wanted to stop all legal and illegal immigration, which is really too much because you can't stop legal immigration almost by definition. But it was not the position of the old left to let everybody in. And the leftover, what little, little islands of all left which remain are not for open borders. I mean, it's really the new left, the Greens and so on, who have been for, but now it's impossible. It's not going to be open borders. I mean, even Macron can't defend that. So if you wanted to immigrate to France, you should have done it before, because now it's going to be too late. But the problem is, what do you do with the people?
Well, is it already too late? I'm sorry, I have to agree with George. Just ask, a hard question. Is it too late? I mean, we had this whole mantra around Angela Merkel, open the doors, let them come in, okay? And, maybe a lot of them did go to Germany, but a lot of them went to France too, okay? I mean, can this
Yes.
can this be regulated? Can it be normalized? And again, the whole identity issue. I mean, and I'm sorry, maybe this is a naive question, but do all these immigrants actually want to be Frenchmen? I have my doubts.
Well, yeah, but I gave you several examples of people who are Frenchmen and who are critical of France. I mean, the question is, indeed, they may not. Well, first of all, you see, also go back to 68. And let's take the more radical movement, namely in Italy with the Red Brigades. I think there were like 5,000 people in the Red Brigade. So that was they were not all in armed struggle, but there were some, and it was real. They killed Moro and so on. So there was a very serious problem. But the way it was solved was by, and it also is existing in France, Belgium, Germany, and so on, is by isolating the real danger, the real armed struggle, people who are in armed struggle, and separate them from the majority. In fact, the majority of the people in the universities and the intellectuals and so on, they found jobs. It wasn't good for the universities, maybe, but that's a collateral damage. And they found jobs in universities, and they called for revolution in front of their lecture hall. But then you have to separate also in the immigrant community. Not everybody doesn't want to be French. The problem is that the discourse, especially the discourse about Islam does not allow all these riots. I'm sorry, people really were good Muslims, they were not. I talked to Muslims, and the Muslims certainly don't want that kind of behavior, and they don't have that behavior in the Muslim countries. I mean, the secularism, the way secularism functions in France is very counterproductive, because they lump together everything that's Muslim, and these people, of course, these young people say, yeah, we are Muslim, but what do they do with this Muslim? You have to separate, and they don't do that. You have to isolate the people who are really dangerous, really causing trouble, terrorists, of course.
But you face the charge of being racist and Islamophobic if you
right,
do that.
And I think there's the issue, which is the first generation and second generation immigrants. So that you got first generation may well say, hey, we want to live according to French laws, but the second generation, the ones who actually didn't ask to come to France, they just don't like things in France or in Germany or anywhere else, and particularly if they do grow up within Islam and they see, I mean, the Western societies, they're not even remotely like they were back in the 1960s, with the way women behave and so on. So it's a big cultural shock for them.
Yeah, you see, but the problem is that I think the right thinks that they're going to get rid of that, like if it was a bad dream, and do as if these people didn't come. I mean, there are millions of people out there, and they're French citizens, and they're there. It's not second generation, it's third or fourth generation now. We are talking about these adolescents, there may be fourth generation, and they've been brought up in France, they've already been in France. They may be nostalgic of what they call the bled, namely the village where their ancestors came from, but they wouldn't want to live there, and there's no reason why they should live there, because they're French. I mean, it may be a mistake to take them in, but once, there was a famous actress before World War II named Arletty, French actress.
Remember her.
She slept with the Germans during the war, and she was taken to court for that after the war. And she had a reaction, which I always found extraordinary and also extraordinarily cynical. He said, if you didn't want us to sleep with Germans, you should not have let them in. And I would say that was a bit unfair.
George, you got to write that one down.
That's a good one. I haven't done that, but that's a great one.
She also said, my heart is French, but my ass is international. But so she was quite funny. But
rare forms of wisdom we do not have today.
I know, but anyway, this remark, you see, if you didn't want to have Muslims in France, you should not have let them in. But once they're in, you have to live with that. I mean, I'm sorry. Unless you dream of, like Zemmour, I think, dreams of having a revenge for Algeria in 1960, having them fleeing, but that would be a catastrophe. It would be a catastrophe for France, because really, I can assure you that if you look at all the people who do menial job, all the people who work in construction, in restoration, everything like that. Most of these people are of foreign origin. I mean, meaning descendant, third or fourth generation. So you don't want to expel all these people. And I think most of these people, I think if you go to the next shop owned by somebody of Algerian or descendants or something like that, they're very much upset with the riot. So you have to separate, you know, the people who are French in some sense, but it doesn't, I mean, you don't, I don't want to have a certificate that you are French. I'm not Belgian. I never proved that I love the king or something like that. I mean, it's very ill-defined, is what you say about values, but the same thing occurs on the left there of this talk about values that they want to export to Russia. But there's also the thing on the right where they speak, you have to French, it's identity and so on. What does it mean? As I say, I gave the example of all these famous writers were all in conflict with the authorities of their time, and it's perfectly okay to be French and be in conflict with the authorities of your time. Now, of course, these young writers, there is a problem, but they can also evolve. They can also, you know, grow up. I mean, Mélenchon, I mean, for example, to give you an example, what I think is absolutely scandalous is now the far right is attacking Mélenchon as being responsible for the riot, but Mélenchon has no influence there. He has no influence whatsoever. And of course, he does ask for peace and so forth. It doesn't change anything. And it's, well, you don't condemn, you know. This condemnation lead nowhere because as long as you don't know what to do. And there is a serious soul searching. And as I say, I mean, this business of being Islamophobic and racist and so on is totally wrong. That's true. It's totally wrong. People who are opposed to immigration are perfectly legitimate. But on the other hand, once people are there, you have to learn to live with them. And in Belgium, for example...
No. They have to learn to live with you, too. Okay? It's both ways, right?
Yes, yes.
Very good point.
Yeah. Of course. But the dominant discourse now is that they have to integrate in a way, assimilate and so on, in ways which are not specified. It's the same thing with values. What do you mean by that? What does it, I mean, respect the law, everybody agrees with that. There's no challenge about that. But, I mean, for example, there was a woman coming from the suburbs, of course, who was a basketball player. She was a very good basketball player, and it was her life, okay? But she wore a veil. And the whole basketball federation, French Basketball Federation, no. She can't play basketball but wearing a veil. I think Ramadan is the only country in the world that does that. French say we have universal values. What is universal about those values? Let her play basketball if she wants to. And
well, I guess the French argument has that we're supposed to separate church from state, religion from public life, and so therefore we don't allow any religious symbol.
I agree we should separate church and state. Nobody challenges that. Nobody says why. I mean, you have to interpret in certain ways, like you interpret the Quran. I mean, why is it that wearing a veil when you play a sport?
But it's not really church and state. It's the role of secularism in public life. Okay,
exactly. That's right. That you can do it in private, but not in public. And I thought that they tried to be consistent. Like, you know, if you go to school, the Jewish boys can't wear yarmulkes, and the cross cannot be shown. I mean, I think they did try to do it in be consistent in this.
Yeah, but they have their own private schools. Huh? The Jewish community has their own private schools, which are very debatable from a secular point of view, and are very debatable also from a national point of view, because they're very pro-Israel, and Israel is not really a friend of France. So we can discuss that. That's the whole point, which is irritating a lot of Muslims, that they, and if they were, I mean, in principle, they're allowed to have their private school, and they created their own, and there are some private Muslim schools, not many, but there are. And if they do many of them, then it will be worse than what is happening now. So that's not the solution, and it's not.
Okay,
I mean,
I'm sorry. I'm going to be really direct with you, but I mean, is there a solution to this? I mean, it seems almost intractable. Okay, I mean, and we're talking about France specifically, but these are problems all across Europe. Okay, and in America in a different way, in a very different way, but it's also an identity issue as well.
That's right. And to add to what Peter just said, I mean, the European Union isn't stopping the flow. I mean, right now, they are still basically talking about bringing in migrants and distributing them around Europe. So they haven't actually even done the minimum, which is to stop the flow completely. They say, well, we can bring them in, but then we'll, every country has a quota and the countries have to pay. If they don't take in the migrants, and they have to pay a fine and whatever. So they haven't even done the minimum, which is stop the flow. And then we can deal with the issue of what do we do with the people who are here.
That I agree. But I'm totally for stopping the flow. And I agree that there are the European Union is not for that. I agree, that's a total disaster. But if you take Meloni in Italy, she's totally subservient to the European Union. So, and she isn't stopping the flow. So what's the point of this so-called far right? They're going to speak about lesbian murder or something like that. Who cares? I mean, the problem I have with the far right is that, you see, well, there's a lot of rhetoric about immigration, of course. It's not clear what they would do because they want to be in the European Union. For example, now the National Front in France is led not by Marine Le Pen, but by Jordan Bardella, who's a young guy who has been put there by Marine Le Pen. And maybe your listener don't know that, but he said recently that the only solution in Ukraine would be for the Russian troops to leave the whole of Ukraine. So in what sense is that different from NATO? It's not different from NATO, it's different from the US. You see, the far right, there are many far rights, okay? There are far right like Zemmour, who thinks we should imitate Israel. There are far right, and even Le Pen, the father was like that, he thinks they should imitate the United States. And of course, there is also a more European far right who wants a more independent Europe, But one cannot speak of the far right in the same way the old left and the new left are not very much in the Greens and have not much in common. And the far right is also a bunch of attitude, and one cannot, sympathize with the national gathering, as it's called now, out of rejection of the European Union because there is no evidence that they have any alternative.
Well, so it looks like I agree with you. I mean, the old right and the left right don't even recognize each other. I agree also that there are many different rights, okay, right-leaning people. Some I absolutely agree with, some that I absolutely don't agree with here. But what's really interesting is that it's all in juxtaposition of the ruling
secular. I don't think a politician should say that the Quran is a sacred book.
Yeah, but see, he can say that. He can say that without any repercussions. There is no Orthodox Russian.
I think, did you manage to continue talking while I disappeared?
No, we had a little short chat, but I'm going to ask Sean to continue.
Okay, well, okay, we're recording now, so let's continue then. Okay. Yes, go on. Go ahead, Sean. Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, no, I was talking about Muslims in Russia, but no, but that's fine with me. I mean, that's a solution, but it's not available here. That's all I'm saying. It's unfortunate, but of course.
And just to catch everybody up, I was talking about the idea of Ruski Mir in Russia, where the different religions and ethnic groups they don't necessarily are integrated, very rarely actually, but they're even using the word being tolerant of is too strong of a word. They have their thing, we have our thing, and we're not going to threaten each other or claim superiority. Now, there are obviously individuals in each group that can make that claim, but that's not a consensus, okay? It's not a consensus at all. I mean, I don't know, George. There's like 160, 180 ethnic groups,
well,
okay?
one
but
thing
they're all
right.
One thing that's maybe...
All these groups were absorbed, let's put it like that, in the Russian Empire, and they've been in the Russian Empire. So it's totally different from France because there it's more like the blacks in the United States. I think the situation of the minorities or the non-Orthodox in Russia is better, and the policy of Russia is better than the one in the US. But for Europe, it's a different situation.
Well, Jacques, just to finish up on this point, is that you're absolutely right, because the Russian Empire was a land empire, was contiguous, okay? And so Russia, under the czars, their contact with the Muslim world goes way, way back, okay? And they know each other. There is a familiarity. Now, they fought wars with each other, and what empires do, the Ottomans, for example. But I mean, they know a lot about each other. For Europe, you have the empire comes to you. See that that is not the case where it happened in Russia. And actually, Russia is a beneficiary of that, because there are no stark difference. If there are differences, they're slowly through time, and there's growing familiarity. That is an advantage. I'm sorry we're cut off, George. And that was our interlude about Ruski Mir. Okay, I'm sorry,
right.
Sean. Go,
well, one thing I wanted to talk about, and maybe this feeds to kind of Muslim resentment in France. I mean, here we have in Sweden, where you have the burning of the Quran. I mean, this is the authorities, they go to court, and the court says, "Oh, well, this is freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We burn the Quran because we don't punish people for freedom of speech." But France does punish people for freedom of speech. You deny the Holocaust, you go to prison, and that's true in a number of countries in Europe. If you Holocaust denial, genocide denial are punished. So you can see that Muslims say, well, you're kind of hypocritical. You want to be champions of free speech, but only certain kinds of speech. But you do punish speech, and France does punish speech.
Of course, it's something which is irritating beyond belief, at least for me, who is neither Jewish nor Muslim, is these double standards. I mean, go burn I don't want to do that, but I just say, go burn the diary of Anne Frank to see if you can do that the same way you can do. And it is interesting, there was a memorial, Holocaust memorial in France that was defamed in this demonstration, and people say we do that because the Jews control the media. Of course, I don't believe the Jews control the media, but of course, nevertheless, there is a huge intellectual influence of the, let's call it the pro-Israel community or the Jewish community in the media and intelligentsia, etc. And it just seems to be, this is absolutely irritating. It's not, I mean, you can be called to the police. Somebody named Shuar has been called to the police because in a discussion where they asked him about the Holocaust, he said, "I did not study the question." I mean, if they have written so many books about the Holocaust, it's for them to be read, and you have read none of them. You should be allowed to say that you have not studied the question. Otherwise, why write these books? And he was taken not to court, but he was called by the police. I mean, it's not just, people who say the Holocaust didn't occur. I mean, it's way beyond that, okay? Way beyond that, okay? And people who criticize, even criticizing the law, even me, I've been always critical of the law. I've always been defending the position of Chomsky on that. And I've been denied, been cancelled talks about physics because of that. So, I mean, I have never denied Holocaust, I never touched that. But just defending free speech can get you into trouble because there is secondary censorship. There is direct censorship and secondary censorship when you criticize the primary censorship. So, and then when it comes to the grossest insult to the prophet, the most vulgar, I mean, this caricature, which even as an atheist, I don't like, I don't find it funny, these caricatures, okay? And you can't even say it's not funny. And this is the greatest thing since the invention of, I don't know what, I mean, it's, and the discourse, you see, I mean, if I was a Muslim,
it's intentional, it's intentional incitement. I mean, they want to hurt, they want to insult, okay?
Yes,
that's very different than, not asking a question, well, why do we have certain approaches on this speech but not on that speech? Okay, that's not inciting, okay? But these drawings of the prophet and things like that is insightful. You want to enrage people, okay?
Right.
And that's the difference.
That's right. And I think if you are going to be no, that's right. I think if you're going to be for free speech, then you have to be consistently for free speech, or you can do both. I mean, in Russia, as far as I understand, you do get punished for burning the Quran, and you do get punished for Holocaust denial. So at least Russia is being consistent. I mean, you got to be one or the other. Either you're going to have free speech, or you're going to punish all kinds of speech for saying, that's incitement. But what Europe does is essentially a double standard, and you can see why it pisses off Muslims. And Erdogan has, I think, expressed that anger. Well, that you count as that's freedom of speech, but all sorts of things you punish. So you just pick and choose what you want to punish.
course, and all the Muslim I talk to, even those who are not really of Muslim origin, they all point out to this double standard. So it's very irritating, and it's impossible. You see, that's what I found amazing in France, that when you listen to the media and so on, you can't even get somebody who noticed that, who mentions that. And that's why I find it, I understand the rage of the kids. Also, there's this guy who's been killed. Immediately, the commentary had said, but he was driving without a driver's license, he was recklessly driving, and he had been done before, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the death penalty doesn't exist. And even if it existed, it wouldn't be that. So, I mean, I agree that the guy is not a saint. Nobody says he's a saint, but he's dead. I mean, he's not wounded, he's not put in jail, he's dead. That is irreversible. So, I mean, and the minute you say justice for this Nile, you're supposed to be complicit with the. I mean, you see, the problem is that there is a total loss of rationality in the West. Whether they talk about China and Taiwan, whether they talk about Russia and Ukraine, or whether they talk about, I mean, there is a loss of rationality, I agree, on certain parts of the New Left, but there is also a lot of rationality on the far right, and different far right, because after all, you know, the Republicans in the United States are just as crazy with China as the others are with Russia, and some of them are crazy with both. So, I mean, there is no, I mean, it's really a problem, because rationality is really something which I thought was important in the West, and it's totally disappeared, and that's a very
so speaking of rationality, what happens now in France? I mean, I'm seeing today that Macron wants to crack down on social media and all forms of expression. Is that where France is heading now? There's going to be a crackdown on all speech?
Yeah, because they've done. Now they're going to be consistent, as you say. I mean, but you see, they as we say, I don't know if that in English, but you cure the flu by breaking the thermometer. I mean, the social media is the thermometer, not the source. And yeah, I mean, even the leader, I mean, I found him amazing. He's, of course, it's a small party now, but the leader of the Communist Party said that they should ban social network. But first of all, probably doesn't know much about technology and how you can effectively do that. And the Minister of Interior, of course, says that, and so on. None of these people know anything about technology. So I don't know how, I don't know either, but I think there are ways around that. And there have been resistance movement and guerrilla movement in the world before there was internet. So.
Well, yeah, I think it's it's purely hypocritical. I mean, George and I can probably speak more specifically about how social media has been used and manipulated for political reasons in the United States. But I mean, also, I think it applies to Europe. So it's quite hypocritical that, you know, the wanting to limit the extent and reach of social media when the state itself has been in bed with social media, determining different narratives. COVID is the best one, but then in the United States, where Russiagate is another one. In the United States, protecting the Biden administration and his family. I mean, social media it works in one direction. It works in the direction of power. And you know, a lot of people see that. And then with these unresolved issues, like in France with immigration and integration issues, you know, it's not surprising people think that, you know, the official narrative of things is stacked against them. I mean, these elites have to blame this all. It all is laid at their feet. Because you talk about rationality. Well, if the scales are tipped in one direction on one issue after another against the truckers in Canada, for example, you know, I'm not surprised that the age of irrationality is flourishing.
That's true. That's true. I agree.
Yeah. And what happens? I mean, now perhaps we could just talk about the foreign policy, as to Russia and Ukraine. What's Macron's game there? What's going to happen? I mean, we've heard Macron is supposed to be the sort of the sensible person. At least he's more sensible than the rest of the gang. Anything to be expected from Macron?
I don't know who says he's. Yeah,
I don't know.
I think his handlers say that. I think his propaganda machine around him says that.
Yes.
The problem is that now he explicitly wants Ukraine to join NATO. What could be more crazy than that? And he says, I mean, he you know, Macron, he has this expression en même temps, together. I mean, he does one thing and the opposite. And, you know, he's supposed to be an intellectual and so on, but he's really very, very irresponsible and very short-sighted. I don't think he has any long-term view of what's good for France.
But
Yeah,
he has
but
said,
see,
just to to answer your question, I mean, he said, he has said sensible things. You remember he said
yes.
NATO is brain dead, and then he went to China and said we mustn't allow Europe to become an adjunct of the United States. I mean, so that's why you could say, well, he seems to say on some days, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, he says sensible things.
Yeah, but then he says the other things. I mean, and also his behavior. You see, the fact that when France was burning, he went to listen to Elton John. Really, he could cancel that at least. I mean, he just doesn't understand human psychology at all.
He's not even a boomer. I mean, why is he going to Elton John? I mean, George, the three of us are boomers, okay? Right. I could understand that, but he's not a boomer.
Right.
But his wife is his wife. But anyway, it will be a great fun, the 14th of July, which is in a few days. I mean, I wonder what's going to happen there. I mean, that's going to be...
But it could be very interesting, because that'll be right after the NATO summit in Vilnius. We could have a very interesting next few days here. So, one of the things that's, George asked the question, what's, Macron's position here? But, it doesn't really matter anymore. It seems that the Europeans have just given up their sovereignty completely. And from my vantage point here, I studied European history. I lived in Europe many years of my life. I adore Europe, at least a version of it, okay? And to see what the elites there are doing to it is it's just completely shameful. And it's turning Europe into a backwater and actually into kind of an embarrassment.
Yeah, that's true. But who are the elites? You see, if you compare Macron to the previous, even to Chirac, or if you take Scholz, he's also a sort of nobody, and Richie Sunak is also a nobody. There is no great leader. And of course, when you have people like von der Leyen, who is given, or my compatriot Michel, they have given enormous power without having any accountability, no election whatsoever. And they are complete idiots. So we are led by really very, very, and there is no alternative. There is no De Gaulle around the corner waiting to take.
And you mentioned Meloni, who people had a lot of hopes for, because Italy might break ranks, but
yeah. Not me. I don't believe in this rhetoric. I don't see why you should believe that rhetoric more than. It's ridiculous. I'm a woman and I'm a Christian and I'm a mother. Nobody prevents her from doing that. Okay, that's not the issue.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
It's identity politics on the other side. That's all.
Right.
But
exactly. And when the other side plays it, they're imitating the left. And every time you try to seek the advantage through imitation, you lose by definition. You always lose by definition. It's absurd. And the thing was, that's right. This is in North America and in Europe. Okay.
And the thing about Meloni, by saying, family values and so on, blah, blah. Well, if you're going to make that issue, von der Leyen has 7 children. So what's your issue? Well, I'm for children. Well, von der Leyen is for children. She has 7 of them. So it was just posturing. She's saying, this is family, but she left aside the really important issues, which was basically war and peace, and that she just left it everything to the Europe to von der Leyen.
Sean, let me ask you as we kind of wrap up here.
I should finish by
I'm going to ask you a big question. There's probably no answer to it, but how does a country like France break out of this cycle, or is it just is there just a beta effect that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger? Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to make a remark about what George said, that I think the main mistake of the 60s slogan is the personal is political. I understand what was meant, but the problem is that the personal is not political. Politics deals with laws and regulation and politics and so on. But the private life of people is none of our business. And so that's why you should not either extol homosexuality or condemn homosexuality or extol religion or condemn. This is not, there are rules and that's it. But the politicians nowadays think they are professor of ethics or professor of philosophy. Right. They have to make all these comments. They don't have to. That's not the way it used to be. And they can, of course, refer to values in order to justify their politics. But it's not their job to educate people to whatever values they think are important. They have to justify their politics.
You're absolutely right. I mean, and this is a relatively recent phenomenon. I mean, it's not, was Margaret Thatcher a good person or a bad person? At the time, it wasn't really debated. It really wasn't important. I mean, what kind of policies? Okay. Franklin Roosevelt, was he a good guy or a bad guy? Well, and what is his legacy? Okay. But now it's it's a purity test about your personality and your virtue signaling. And that's not politics.
No, that I agree. But that was a mistake, and I think Meloni does the same, except in the other direction. But I don't know. I mean, what's the future? I mean, what was the future of China at the end of the 19th century? I mean, I don't know. I mean, what was the future of France at the end of the Fourth Republic? They were in the quagmire of the Algerian War, and then of course I agree that there is no De Gaulle, there is no Sun Yat-sen, there is no Mao Zedong, there is nobody who will change the situation for the moment. But you never know. I mean,
yeah. But at the end of the Fourth Republic, at the end of the Fourth Republic, there were the people that wanted salvation for France. Okay, they believed in France. Okay,
right. Nobody. And also, I think that you had a generation of political leaders who remembered Europe before the war. So let's say De Gaulle. He had a memory of Europe which had not been subordinated to the United States. Willy Brandt as well. He didn't remember the Europe that was not subordinated to the United States. All the political leaders today, essentially, they grew up in an Americanized Europe. I mean, they've grown up with Europe actually always following America's lead. So they don't know any other Europe.
Good point.
But many people do. I mean, many people do. I mean, of the ordinary citizens, you never know what can happen. I agree. What I do believe is that you need a fundamental change, and there's no such hope on the horizon. I don't believe that the National Front, National Gathering is such a hope, but maybe some hope like that, or even less Zemmour, but some hope like that might happen someday. I may not live long enough to see it, but that's another question.
I don't want to patronize George here, but Viktor Orban. I mean, he has a model. He has a model. Okay, it's a small model. It's small. Okay, I'm agreeing with that. You need mass for something to work in a big way. I understand that, but there is an alternative out there. Russia is also an alternative out there, though that can't be seriously discussed in public now. But it is an argument if you want to be honest. Okay. It's there. Okay. You can't say there are no solutions. There are others trying it.
See, the problem of Orban is that he's the leader of a country that's actually subsidized by the rest of Europe, unlike France and Germany. So in that sense, he's in a difficult situation because they will really to cut the subsidies. It would be a difficult situation for him. And so you need a stronger country to. I mean,
that's why I said it was small.
I don't know. Unlike George, I don't know Hungarian. At least I suppose so, but I don't know Hungarian, and I don't know what he says. But whatever I see in English, I tend to agree with him. That's true, especially about the war and also about migration. I completely agree with that. But whether he's nevertheless in a not so strong position.
No, I think I agree. I think he's not. On the other hand, he has kind of shown, and I think as Peter's pointed out, that I mean, he's not going to get any more money out of Europe. I mean, that's gone. I mean, the Europeans have pretty cut off all funds to him. So he's at least said, okay, well, I'm going to look around the rest of the world, and that's an opening. That just suggests that, hey, there's a bigger, wider world outside where you can get money. I mean, he signs deals with Russia. He just breaks ranks and signs deals with Russia for energy. He goes to China, tries to get money from China. So at least it is a model, but admittedly, it's a small country, and there's a limit to what a small country can do. But I mean, I think that it is a model of what you can do if you don't follow the dictates of Washington and Brussels.
That's true. Of course, France has that in its history with the Gauls, and so Sweden with the Palm and so on. So there is even Austria with Kreisky. I mean, there were several leaders in Europe who were more independent than they are now. So about as far as Russia is an example. It's not an exam that can be imitated for various reasons that I already mentioned, also because of the size of the country and the standard of living of the population. It's not so easy I mean, the situation here is different, but who knows? I mean, I'm not totally desperate in the sense that maybe something new will come out of the chaos. But now, of course, situation is very.
Let me just ask a really nerdy question, okay? Because George and I think it's fair to say, George, if I could speak on your behalf, we're admirers of de Gaulle, okay? What are the barriers for a new de Gaulle in France?
Well, simply that there is no World War II that has created such a person. That's a problem. I mean, it's not that I want a war, but of course, wars have tended to privilege exceptional individuals on all sides, also on the Hitler side. I mean, Hitler was remarkable in some negative way, but he was not an ordinary person. And so was Mussolini.
Also, we had Stalin and we had Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, it was an amazing time in human history. And now we have the world going to hell in a handbasket, and leadership in the West is, well, it's left wanting. I mean, that's one of the things I find striking as I read the news every single day, is that there is no real leadership that is respected for the right reasons in the West.
Oh, that's certainly true.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jean, this has been, as always, a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for giving us your time, particularly as you're on vacation. So we really appreciate it. And definitely next time, quantum mechanics. So
it will be short. It'll be a short video.
Yeah. But well, thank you everybody for joining us on the Gaggle. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.